You know, there was a time when Steven Spielberg wasn't a household name, and he only had a few notable movies. And then he made this. The film that made people afraid to go back in the water, and possibly the only essential shark movie, Jaws remains an iconic piece of cinema history. Given it's summer and the month they thought they might be able to save, I thought I'd take a look back at the director's humble beginnings by listing some of the lesser-known facts about the classic film. By that I mean, I'll try to avoid the more common stuff like the shark's name being Bruce, the lead actors not getting along, the fact that the Indianapolis mission actually happened, and focus on the things you may have actually not known. Of course, being the film that it is, a lot of you will know everything on this list, but it is what it is. This is 25 things you likely didn't know about Jaws. It was supposed to come out around Christmas. Given that summer is commonly mentioned, and it's a shark movie taking place primarily on the beach and in a boat, you'd think the release date of June 20th was nothing but intentional. However, the original idea was the exact opposite, as it was intended to be released a year earlier in December. Because that's exactly what I like to watch around Christmas. Well, that and Santa Jaws. It's about as far off as you could get, and obviously this early date ended up being undoable. I know we commonly say it was for the best, but this was for the best. It was almost directed by Dick Richards. Best known for producing the film Tootsie, Dick Richards was originally brought on to direct Jaws by Universal Pictures' Richard D. Zanuck and David Brown after seeing his directorial debut. The reason this didn't happen is somewhat hard to believe, but apparently he had a habit of referring to the shark as a whale. This led to them thinking he knew nothing about sharks, unlike the true-to-life ones in the film that pursue boats, and he was replaced with Spielberg. Possibly the luckiest break in film history. The unused graphic death. A lot of you probably know by now that the demise of the young boy early in the film was originally going to be much more terrifying, with the shark emerging from the water holding the boy in its mouth before it bites down. This was removed due to the fact that it was way too graphic and that it showed off the shark way too early, but it's not the only death in the film to be significantly changed. The man in the boat, notable for his severed leg, originally had a much more graphic demise in which the man attempts to grab onto Brody's son Mike in what seems like a desperate attempt not to get dragged under before inevitably letting go. Many say if this had made the cut, it would have made the film less accessible, affecting its popularity. And while that may be true, Quint's death was pretty graphic and drawn out. I don't know if it should have been cut, but it is a shame it never got fully released. One scene was filmed in a pool. Filmed on location in Martha's Vineyard, most of the scenes taking place in the boat were in fact filmed on the ocean. This led to a production that went way over budget, but the one horror scene in this quote-unquote horror movie was in fact filmed in the editor's pool. It was actually a last-minute idea, as Spielberg wanted some kind of jump scare, and what better way to do that than set up the scene at night and have a decapitated head pop out at night. The pool belonged to film editor Verna Fields at her California estate, and was the only scene in the movie to be filmed in such a way. He even filled the pool with milk to make it look more like the ocean, and the result is a truly memorable scene, even if Jaws barely qualifies as horror. The tiger shark came from Florida and was a pain in the ass. While the 3 white sharks used to make the movie were animatronics, the non-guilty tiger shark was ironically enough real and a pain in the dick to obtain. They initially hired some local fishermen to catch the shark, but none were big enough to pass, and the special effects team were too busy to make something up. Luckily, Teddy Grossman, an uncredited stunt coordinator and stunt double, along with his friend nicknamed the Ancient Marina, flew down to Florida as it apparently had good shark fishing. And the problem is, once they caught one, no commercial airline fancied flying a 15-foot casket containing a recently deceased carcass as carry-on luggage. With the fish degrading rapidly, producer Bill Gilmore sent out a private jet to fly the two and the cargo back. So, happy ending, aside from the fact that there wasn't enough room for them and the shark, so Grossman still had to fly commercial. Like I said, a pain in the cunt. A lot went into the first shark attack. This may be an unpopular opinion, but I never felt the first shark attack aged the best. By that I mean I prefer the other death scenes, but that doesn't mean a lot didn't go into this. First off, Spielberg rigged underwater cables to violently drag the actress Susan Backlany, creating a realistic action. She wasn't told when this would start to make the reaction look more genuine, and then there's the matter of the drowning sound effect. To do this, a backliner was placed in front of a microphone with her head facing the ceiling, and water was poured down her throat from above. Honestly, given the effort that went into this, I probably should like it a lot more. George Lucas got his head stuck in the shark's mouth. Despite popular belief and the thing we just covered, Chrissy wasn't really the shark's first victim. It was actually George Lucas. Well, not really, but he did come to visit the set in 1974, in which he decided to stick his head inside Bruce's mouth to get a closer look at the mechanics. Spielberg, along with filmmaker John Milius, took the opportunity to play a joke on Lucas and activate the mouth closing around Lucas's head, trapping him inside. The comedy of this moment surely wore off after the head wouldn't reopen, but Bruce never had the best performance record. He did get free, as you'd probably guess, and I'm sure the idea was a lot funnier in theory. I guess you had to be there. Robert Shaw was shot at his rental house. After arriving in Martha's Vineyard along with his wife Mary, the first night may have had a bit more excitement than they expected. This is mainly because a local resident fired several rifle bullets through the front door of the rental house. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, and the bullets weren't even meant for Shaw, but apparently he thought the place was empty. The shooter was merely fined and released since nobody was hurt, but the same cannot be said for the downstairs bathroom tiles. Charlton Heston was mad about losing his role. As with many iconic roles, the person we can only imagine playing the part was not the original choice. Robert Duvall was the first to be asked to play Police Chief Brody, but he turned it down, so Charlton Heston became the studio's preferred choice. Given he actively wanted the part, his star power, and the fact that Spielberg had nothing against him, you'd think it'd be an easy decision. However, due to his popularity and heroic persona, Spielberg felt it would overshadow the other actors and simply wouldn't fit the character. Obviously, he convinced them to cast Roy Scheider instead, and Heston seems to have never let this go. He turned down a role for Spielberg's film 1941, which he was apparently deeply offended by, and as promised, never collaborated with the director again. Given his death in 2008, my guess is he's gonna stick to that. Slapped 17 times. You know, despite the sharks being fake, they still look pretty damn good compared to the later sequels. You know what wasn't fake? Being slapped. Repeatedly. The grieving mother, who in real life passed away in 2020 of COVID, unfortunately didn't really know how to fake slap, so she did it for real. And given the fact that she only has one role outside of Jaws, I'm gonna assume she's not much of an actor, which would explain why this took 17 takes. One of which she even admitted that she hit him so hard it knocked off his glasses. And I'll admit, I do miss the days when you could slap somebody in public and not face consequences, assuming it was completely justified. But maybe after the 10th take, I don't know, maybe it's cut away or something. Hooper returned in Piranha 3D. More of an Easter egg really, but in the second Piranha remake, Piranha 3D, there is a character named Matt, played by Richard Dreyfuss, singing a very familiar song before being devoured by piranhas in the movie's intro. Dreyfuss stated that he took the role after being offered a large amount of money, which he then donated to charity, and that the character he portrays is more of a parody. Now this means the guy from Jaws is not deceased, but anybody who bothered to read the credits probably thinks differently. I mean, given the artwork similarities, it's easy to believe they're both connected. Spielberg appears, and so does his dogs. The fact that Spielberg makes a cameo over the radio is probably not that shocking to the avid Jaws fan. His other cameo in the local band is a bit less known, in which he plays clarinet, but what you likely didn't know is the inclusion of his dogs. That being Chief Brody's 2 Cocker Spaniels, played by Steven's actual dogs, Elmer and Zelman. And that's about all there is to it. The 1941 intro. Little is known about the first iconic shark victim, and for many of you, the same can be said about the actress. And in my opinion, that's unfortunate. Susan Backlany, not known for much outside of Jaws, does actually have a scene in another Spielberg movie. That being the aforementioned 1941, in which they essentially recreate the opening of Jaws, but instead of being attacked by a shark, she's lifted into the air by a Japanese sub. Now, in theory, this kind of thing should be well known, given the fact that Spielberg directed both movies, but 1941 is not only unique among Spielberg films, it's also not particularly liked. Personally, I'm quite fond of it, but as you know, some found it offensive, and the casual Spielberg fan may not even know it exists. The fear of water was real. If you didn't grow up in the 70s, you may have heard your parents say, "Oh, that movie Jaws came out and people were afraid to go back in the water." And you were like, "Oh yeah, right, a movie could have an effect that big, it's just a cliche." Well, fact is, despite sharks being a known thing before this came out, and the fact that they don't really behave like this, the effect this movie had was in fact real, and it may be worse than you think. Beaches losing money, shark killings going up, one specific beach in Southern California had to be cleared out because of a fake shark sighting, kind of like the second movie, and the concept of a vengeful shark was even a thing, kind of like the fourth movie. Yeah. Luckily, more modern movies like the Sharknado franchise and Whatever Headed Shark Attack haven't had the same effect. Peter Benchley scored a cameo. A slightly more well-known fact, but still quite relevant, is that Peter Benchley, the guy who wrote the novel of the same name, had a cameo as the TV reporter during the 4th of July scene. Quite fitting too, as he had been a journalist on the Washington Post and an editor on Newsweek. His wife and daughter were on the beach too during filming, and this is not the only scene with him shot for the movie. A deleted scene would see the author attempting to get an interview with Chief Brody about why the beaches aren't closed. It was shot several times, but inevitably not used. Similar events in Egypt. As you know, Jaws had terrified beachgoers for years to come, but by the 2010s that had all but worn off. Unfortunately, sharks can still kill you, even if accidentally, and at a beach resort in Egypt, very similar events to the movie played out. After a string of fatal shark attacks, the local authorities refused to believe it and wouldn't close the beaches down. In 2010, no doubt. They did eventually kill the shark, you know, the wrong one, and reopen for a second time, only for the real shark to strike again. Now, I know what you're thinking. Does it chase down a boat? Do they blow it up? Did the movie just become more accurate? Well, no. Instead, it just leaves. Probably to hunt in a new area that can't distinguish between a severed leg that's been bitten off or accidentally chopped off and a TikTok challenge gone terribly wrong. Spielberg laughed at the theme. You know that theme, the one that's real iconic, that almost everybody knows, probably wouldn't even get copyrighted if I played it? Well, apparently it was funny. In fact, he thought it was a joke. The score was written by Spielberg's friend John Williams, and upon hearing it the first time, he began laughing, assuming it was a joke, and asked to hear the real music. It of course did become the real music, and the rest is, well, you know. However, if you really think about it, if you take the score out of context, just forget the movie as a thing, I could kind of see the initial reaction. The "you're gonna need a bigger boat" line was improvised. Almost as iconic as the theme is the notable line, "you're gonna need a bigger boat." And it was improvised. Hard to believe, isn't it? However, it wasn't so much a spontaneous reaction, more so an inside joke. You see, given that this was filmed at sea, a small supply boat was needed to steady the barge and carry the crew's equipment. This meant the crew members had to work in a small cluttered space, with many of them complaining it was too small, and repeatedly telling the producers you're gonna need a bigger boat. This led to it becoming an inside joke being said every time something went wrong. Roy decided he liked it a great deal, and you can figure out the rest. Oddly enough, many people think it's "we're gonna need a bigger boat" because that's what you'd say in that situation, but given the line's history, this does kinda make sense. Hooper was meant to die. The reason for such a big change from the novel begins with Spielberg wanting to use real trained sharks. This failed for obvious reasons, but some B-shots were actually used for the famous shark cage scene. It was captured by a second unit team in Australia, and the scene when the shark violently attacks the cage was actually a mistake. A mistake that would have likely killed the stunt diver if he hadn't been afraid to enter, but the footage looked so good, they decided to use it despite the cage being empty. So that's about the face of it. They wanted to use that scene, nobody in the cage, so Hooper got to live. Yellow meaning danger. This isn't so much a fact, but if you pay attention, you'll notice the color yellow appearing whenever danger is approaching. An obvious example are the yellow barrels, as they're literally stuck to the shark, but others include the hat of Alex's mother and his raft, the shirt worn by Pippett's owner, the light Hooper uses to explore the boat, the rope of the victim on the Forth, and many others. You also have the Amity sign itself, along with the mayor's jacket, which is kind of self-explanatory. This may not be confirmed, but it seems very likely in this case that yellow is the new red. Shaw had to flee the country after the scenes were completed. Apparently, Robert Shaw, aka Quint, was in deep IRS tax debt during filming. What this meant was he could only travel to the US for non-professional trips, so when the cameras stopped rolling, he'd had to retreat back to Canada. On top of that, given the money he owed, he basically left the project empty-handed. This really speaks volumes about the actor, given the passion he brought to the film, despite the situation at hand. I guess the old saying goes, they just don't make them like they used to. The film was nearly destroyed in a boat accident. In an attempt to make it look like the orca was really being tossed about by a shark by gunning it from both sides, this may have accidentally broke a hole in the boat's hull. Mayhem then ensued as Spielberg was on the bullhorn for the safety of the actors, while sound engineer John R. Carter supposedly shouted "fuck the actors, save the sound department." With water up to their knees and the camera submerged in water, they assumed it was completely ruined. Luckily, the film was flown to a New York lab, and not a single shot was lost. But they did learn an important lesson on why actors are a bit more important than the sound department. Spielberg had nightmares. As we know by now, the film had a somewhat negative effect on beachgoers for years to come, and you probably assumed the director wouldn't be affected. It's true he didn't suffer from the common shark-themed nightmare, at least I think he didn't, but he would on occasion wake up during the night thinking he was still on set. Apparently, there is some stress involved in making what would essentially become the first summer blockbuster, but given he's made a few of those by now, I'm sure the issue has all but subsided. Better than the book. Most uncommon, especially for a film of this stature, but Jaws is a rare example of the movie being the superior version. Obviously, we can't get into every single detail, but something notable about the book is that everybody's an asshole. Brody was short-tempered and violent, Hooper lacks any of his movie charm and even had an affair with Brody's wife, and is overall egotistical, and even Quint, who wasn't exactly nice, was still much less of a dick opposed to his novel counterpart. Now, this kind of thing is okay, the Hateful Eight being a good example, but I don't think actively wanting all the characters to die would have been as memorable. Then we have the ending, which as you know, sees Hooper not surviving the shark cage ordeal, and Quint, instead of being eaten, gets dragged under by his own harpoon rope. This means there's no big lucky shot explosion. Instead, Brody just waits for death before the shark dies from its harpoon injury, leaving him alone at sea. Despite not having an initial fear of water in this, being alone was the thing he feared the most. Definitely not a bad premise for an ending, but let's be honest, it wouldn't have had the same impact. The Bond reference on the license plate. And the most important thing of all, the 007 reference. That being the license plate pulled out of the real tiger shark's body containing the iconic 007. But the references don't end there. The plate is clearly from Louisiana, the state where Live and Let Die, the most recent Bond film, took place and was mostly filmed. To the left and right of that, you have the years 72 and 73, which is of course when it was produced and released. You'd think that'd be enough, but then if you look to the top of the plate, you'll see the words Sportsman's Paradise, the state slogan, which can also be seen on the road sign in the 007 film. The reason for this is likely because Steven always wanted to direct a Bond movie, but was never given the chance. Despite being debatably the most successful director of all time, he was told he's not good enough. I guess that makes sense. Fun fact, the same plate appears as an Easter egg in the 1999 film Deep Blue Sea. It's just too bad that's not a good movie. And that was 25 things you, maybe this time, didn't know about Jaws. If you knew everything on the list, feel free to dislike, accuse me of using ChatGPT, or just find a name or word that I pronounced wrong, and fill the comment section with that. I'm the Analyst, and remember kids, it's never okay to slap somebody 17 times. Even if they agree to it, it's still not a good thing. So, you've made it to the end. That's an impressive feat indeed. Since you managed that, I guess check out the gaming channel, in which I cover a variety of gaming topics, like analysis videos, such as this one. If you're into that, then press the link in the description. It's that simple.